Hello and welcome back to the Life from This podcast. For this episode, we have a lot of sort of breaking news, some very exciting, well, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but there are things that broke this week that just seem to kind of break the watch world, which is quite interesting. The reaction on social media, obviously in the watch community, was pretty overwhelming with the things that did come out in the last week. So we're going to go through some of the highlights, and obviously the things that I'm speaking about, I will say if it's confirmed or not. This is not me saying that this is anything that's, if I'm talking about something that's allegedly happening, obviously I'm not saying that this isn't a confirmed bit of news coverage. Obviously I'm just kind of discussing what I've seen over the last week. I'm sure that it will eventually be released and by the companies or the individuals who are involved in all of this. So stay tuned for that. But for right now, I can kind of give you what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what's going on in the watch industry, and give you my initial thoughts on some of these specific topics. As always, with every one of our episodes of the Life and the Wrist podcast, there will be links in the show notes of this podcast to all of the topics that we will be discussing. So if you want to read more or see what I'm referencing during this podcast, be sure to head over to the show notes. You can also check out our website, our YouTube channel, and our social medias. Those are all also going to be linked in the show notes. So to kick things off, a pretty big announcement came, alleged announcement came that Rolex will be discontinuing Carl F. Bucherer. Now, you probably are familiar with Rolex. You probably are familiar or somewhat have heard of the name Bucherer. Bucherer is a very large Swiss retailer of both watches and jewelry, and back in August of 2023, Rolex announced their acquisition of Bucherer, which was really one of the most significant shifts in the watch retail space, considering the fact that Bucherer was a company that sold and was the authorized dealer of Rolex watches, and Rolex ended up purchasing them. This acquisition of Bucherer obviously strengthened Rolex's retail presence across Europe as well as the US. And with that purchase, they also ended up acquiring the legacy of Carl F. Bucherer, the brand of watches that they produced. Now, you might not be super familiar with the watches that Carl F. Bucherer produces. I'll say there aren't probably a ton of sort of standout, well-known Carl F. Bucherer watches that collectors are really trying to get their hands on. But according to Bilanz, which is the industry source that sort of released this news, Carl F. Bucherer had been operating at a consistent loss, despite reaching pretty impressive sales figures of between 80 to 100 million Swiss francs in the peak years of its operations. But according to Bilanz, the total losses were estimated around 250 million Swiss francs over the brand's lifetime. Now, this is a pretty significant loss for a watch brand to have, and if you're looking purely from a financial or if you're looking at a company trying to figure out ways in which you can improve the operations of an organization, looking at brands looking at parts of your organization where you're bleeding pretty substantial amounts of cash consistently year over year is a good place to start. And I don't know if this was a move by Rolex's, their investment into the brand, looking at places where they could cut costs or cut losses and removing them from the operations of Bucherer as a company. We really won't be super. My guess is Rolex will eventually announce this, but I highly doubt that they are going to go into detail about the reason why they decided to make those decisions. That's probably going to be similar to a lot of the trade secrets that they kept close to the vest. But the closing of Carl F. Bucherer, the watch brand, is pretty incredible. Obviously, Bucherer has a pretty extensive retail network with about 250 stores, 50 that are directly operated by Bucherer and its U.S. subsidiary Tourneau. And there are going to be people that are going to be affected by this. I think there's something about 100 employees that are going to be affected. Obviously, Rolex and Bucherer haven't officially commented on this development, but I believe that some insiders have said that a lot of these employees are Rolex is working to move them to new positions within the entire organization, which I think shows it's a very Swiss mindset of saying, let's find something that's sustainable, try to make fairly conservative decisions, and not be hasty with cutting these employees from the organization just because we want to close this specific brand. So I know I mentioned it, but obviously I don't really know a ton of Karl F. Bucherer watches. I have seen a couple, over the last couple of years that piqued my interest when they were released, but I haven't really, kept up with the brand or kept up with any specific watches. If you are a collector of Karl F. Bucherer, be sure to send us a message. Hit us up on our social medias, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this specific development. I will say I do have a friend who has some sort of sponsorship deal with Karl F. Bucherer. Obviously he is sort of a brand ambassador for the organization, wears their watches, in that sort of relationship that he has with the brand. I haven't reached out to him to see what's sort of going on with his relationship. I would imagine it would probably be terminated. I don't think they would kind of shift his sponsorship contract from Karl F. Bucherer to Rolex. That's a pretty big jump, but who knows? We'll have to see how I'm excited to see how that develops for him. But there are obviously people who will be affected by this. And that's sort of the closest relationship I have with someone who's sort of involved with Karl F. Bucherer, the watches. I think this is another example of sort of how the retail landscape is being developed, or it's developing over time post this Rolex acquisition. And I think cost cutting is obviously something that one would do when you do dive into an acquisition. And we'll have to see what ends up happening. I'm also speculating the fact that Rolex is sort of at the making the decision for Bucherer as a brand to close this specific watch manufacturer. That's also me speculating, so I'm not sure if that is actually how this ended up going, but it would seem kind of strange for Bucherer to make the decision that they would be closing Karl F. Bucherer just because they were losing a ton of money. I think there's probably more people and more decisions that are being made with a wider set of people post this investment. So that's Rolex, the bit of Rolex news that came out. The next thing I want to discuss is actually not an article. I'll leave a link to a collaboration that was done between these two organizations, but it was posted by King Flum on Instagram. It seems like there is some sort of leak, and by the time you listen to this, I believe this watch will have been released, because MB&F had posted something on Instagram and posted sort of via social medias and on their website that they would be releasing a couple new calibers, a couple new watches this year. And so people were obviously waiting with bated breath. We got the Longhorns of the perpetual calendar and and their split-second chronograph, which was very, very exciting. I think I covered that on the last podcast. And they posted something on Instagram where they would be releasing a new watch on Monday, the 10th of February. So you're probably listening to this at least on Tuesday, the 11th of February, but kind of teased a little bit of a release. And King Flum actually released some pictures that I don't think were supposed to be released, but it looks like MB&F has collaborated with Bulgari and released a new version of the horological machine number 10. I've seen pictures, obviously, of the dial where you can see the collaboration stamps, but I don't know exactly how the horological machine number 10, nicknamed the Bulldog, is going to look differently based on this. If you don't know, this watch is an incredibly... the HM10 is a really incredible piece of horological art. You have these, obviously, these domes that have the hours and minutes on it in this case that looks exactly like a Bulldog. You have a power reserve indicator that's actually the jaws of the Bulldog itself, flying balance wheel on the top, super intricate design, very, 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 very fun in its looks, and it seems that Bulgari and MB&F are doing some sort of collaboration for this watch. So, being that this is happening after they release this watch, please go ahead and go to the MB&F website to see what they ended up producing. But if you don't know, MB&F has actually collaborated with Bulgari before with their LM Flying T Allegra, which is the sort of product. It's a collaboration with Bulgari's product creation executive director Fabrizio Buenamassa Stigliani, and it's essentially one of their MB&F Flying Tees, which is I think it's catered a little bit more to a lady's watch, but has an incredible amount of pieces of intricate, very feminine jewelry that's placed onto the watch. Being that the Flying T is sort of made with women in mind, I think adding these beautiful colored gems and diamonds allow this watch to be an incredibly beautiful piece of jewelry. And then you obviously have the Flying T, which is a very nice, well produced tourbillon that's quite attractive and really is, I think, was the first time that MB&F decided they would produce a ladies' watch. That was the first collaboration that they did. I'm very, very excited to see what ends up happening with this HM10. We'll probably cover it on next week's podcast because it is a significant release from a brand that I truly love to cover. So exciting to see what they ended up producing. But a little bit of a leak came this week for these two brands. All right, shifting gears slightly, I'm going to go a little bit more towards the vintage watch realm and talk about a very important Patek Philippe reference 1518 that featured heavily on social media, namely from the Monaco Legend Group auction house. So if you don't know, the reference 1518 was produced in 281 examples and is essentially the grail watch for many collectors. What you have is a 35 millimeter perpetual calendar with moon phase chronograph. That was the first perpetual calendar moon phase with chronograph ever produced by Patek Philippe in serial production. These pieces are incredibly desirable. The proportions of the case are exceptional. At 35 millimeters, it fits really, really well. And to be honest, it is the pinnacle, I think, of vintage watch collecting. As I mentioned, there's 281 examples that were produced in different case metals, and there were exactly 4 of these that were produced in stainless steel. And one of those pieces was announced by Monaco Legend Group that the case serial 5084-753 was available for private sale. And this is an incredible bit of news because for a reference 1518 to come to market is already a rarity, and then for one of the steel versions of these watches to come to market is also incredibly rare. The watch is being sold for private sale, which is a little bit of a difference compared to some of the other 1518s that have sold in the past. I think Monaco Legend Group quoted that they're talking in excess of $20 million. And I think it's justified. To give you a little bit of history on this specific watch, this watch was actually originally discovered in New York on 47th Street in the early 1980s, where it reportedly sold for $4,500 and it was purchased by a Swiss watch dealer who I think ended up owning it for a few years and then sold it to a Milan-based retailer or an owner of a Milan-based retailer. And I think it traded hands a few times, and then it ended up featuring in an auction, I think, called Orion, where it was sold for 1.6 million French francs, which is about $281,000 at the time, and sold there for about that much, which is, I would imagine it probably sold for, there's a little bit of profit in there for someone who ended up purchasing it. And then in 1995, in October, Antiquorum offered this watch for sale. It was one of the three other very important Patek Philippe watches that featured on the back cover of this watch, and it sold to I think a German collector via private sale, because it actually failed to sell at auction. The watch. So after that private sale, eventually Davide Parmigiani, who's the owner, or I think the chairman of Monaco Legend Group, ended up purchasing this watch, and I think it was with some of the collectors in his sort of circle, and I think sold twice over the last 2 decades. Obviously, Parmigiani bought it from the German collector, and it was purchased apparently for about $1.1 million, and then sort of stayed within the country of Italy and sold twice over the last 2 decades. And now Davide Parmigiani will offer this up for, like he said, in excess of $20 million. The one thing that's quite unique about this watch is obviously it's a very, very rare example in this case metal. Additionally, it is confirmed that it actually originally sold on a bracelet, which is one of the unique factors about this specific reference. And there's 4 examples. 2 of them are obviously, I think, of the 4, 2 of them are considered to be fairly. We'll say a little bit better than the other 2. The last steel example that sold was in 2016, which was the serial number ending in 75, and I think that one sold for about $11 million, I believe. And so now you're comparing, 2016 to 2025, so almost 10 years later, and considering the fact that the interest in these watches have become much greater. It all kind of makes sense in the end of the day. One of the questions that is quite interesting is Davide Parmigiani was asked why this watch is not going to be sold in sort of a traditional auction, why via private sale, and his comment was quite interesting, where he basically said, once you get into sort of the $5, $6, $7 million, and I'll kind of quote him, watch auctions raise the bar until $5, $6, $8 million, and you can see it at even in Orel's auctions, which are Philip's. Watches will go for this kind of money, but when you go over the $10 million mark, it's difficult. Parmigiani believes that this method is a better way to make the buyer feel more comfortable and have the time to think about how much they want to own the watch. This is quite an interesting comment, and might speak a little bit more to the types of buyers that are bidding these types of amounts at auction. So if the watch does sell, it's so a couple of things that I'm interested in. If the watch does sell, will they announce the price? The second thing is, I would love to know who was purchasing it, but we'll probably never find that out until it comes to sale again. And then the third is, when will we see this watch at auction again? Because when a lot of people, when they purchase these really rare references from Patek Philippe, they're not going to get rid of them very quickly. I'd probably say that as time has gone on and people have acquired the watches that they really, really want, those references have appeared less and less on the market. And I think it's because there are people who want to hold on to these pieces. They've purchased something that's really significant to them, and it totally makes sense. So a very exciting bit of vintage news. If you follow us on Instagram, you probably saw this bit of news. We did post about it on our story there. So we'll shift back over to the modern side of things. We took a little detour there with a bit of vintage watch news, but I'll speak briefly about 2 new watch releases that came out. Zenith introduced a collaboration with Revolution, which is called the CoverGirl Carbon. If you don't know, Zenith and Revolution have collaborated over the last several years to create Zenith Chronomaster Revival A3818 CoverGirl models, and they have a couple of different versions of these pieces. I won't go too in depth. Go to the link in the description or in the show notes of this podcast so that you can see these watches. Obviously, they cover the trilogy that they have produced, but the watch that they ended up producing for this release was the watch is entirely made of carbon fiber. Both, the case, the crown, the pushers, all of it is made in carbon fiber, and it comes on a really cool sort of gay fair-esque bracelet that I think is also made in carbon fiber. And this watch weighs in at 55 grams, which is an incredible weight because this makes it I think it's the lightest. Make sure I get this. It is the lightest automatic winding chronograph ever produced at 55 grams. So you've got carbon fiber case, dial, pushers, crown, you name it. It is in carbon fiber, which is very, very significant because you've got an incredibly lightweight material in an incredibly lightweight watch. There's a couple of versions that it comes in. You can get it with a Velcro strap, and then you can get it with like I mentioned, the carbon fiber ladder bracelet that's sort of in this gay frere-esque design, which is pretty cool. I think playing around with case metals is a cool thing to do. It gives the watch an interesting look, an interesting feel on the wrist. If you've ever put on a watch that's made out of titanium, you can clearly feel the difference between weights and how it feels on your wrist. It's also in, I think, one of the best reissued chronograph references that have ever been produced. If you want to get an exceptional reissue, look at the Zenith A3818 because I think it's exceptionally done by the brand. It's obviously running on the El Primero movement as well, a very attractive watch movement, and obviously this watch has a display case back, which is a nice feature for the wearer to enjoy. So if you go all the way from, the release of the A3818, which I think was in 1971, up till now, it's obviously developed over time. And I believe this carbon fiber piece is going to be limited to 150 pieces. The other pieces that Revolution did with this watch, with their CoverGirl, I think were also limited in production. The one in 2020, which was the Chronomaster Revival CoverGirl, that I think was steel with a blue dial, was limited to 100 pieces. Then there was the Airweight CoverGirl that was limited to 250 pieces. This one's limited to, like I said, 150 pieces. So cool bit of a cool trilogy, I'd say, and I think a well-executed trilogy by Zenith and Revolution. All right, the last thing I wanted to discuss was a very, very cool. I hate to even say very. I think it's super cool Omega Seamaster that was released, called the Milano Cortina 2026, which is the brand's first release for the 2026 Winter Olympics. So, for those of you who are excited by Olympic sports, February 6, 2026 will be the return of the Winter Olympics, and it's will take place in Milano. It's the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics, and this means that Omega has the opportunity to release some watches in preparation, in anticipation of this Winter Olympics happening. If you don't know, Omega is obviously the Olympic Games timekeeper. And back in 1956, there was a really cool watch that they released, which was the reference 2850SC, which was a nice gold Omega time-only piece with a beautiful Olympic Games emblem on the dial. Time-only on a bracelet. Very, very, very nice piece. And what they've done with this new watch is they've released a similar time-only Omega Seamaster with a very similar case design. And what that means is these really beautiful sort of angled angular lugs that stand out quite substantially. They're sort of geometrically shaped downwards towards the wrist that allow it to sit quite comfortably. It's 37 millimeters in diameter, so very, very wearable. They really took the aesthetics of these lugs and put it into the case. You can really feel sort of the angular nature of this case when you look at the way the lugs are manufactured. Even when you look at the crown, which has this hexagonal shape, which I think is something you do not see these days on watches. So a very cool release, 37 millimeters. It's not limited in production as far as I know. The case metal is moonshine gold, so quite a vibrant color with a white Grand Feu dial, 100 meters of water resistance, and then obviously you have the 26 Milano Cortina Olympic logo on the back of the dial. It's running on the Omega caliber 8807 automatic movement, I believe. It's a coaxial movement with an hours, minutes, and center seconds. This watch is really, really nice. Now, the one thing that is somewhat controversial is it's $19,300 US for a time-only Omega, obviously manufactured in gold, in moonshine gold, which I think is something to be said. But for a time-only piece, some of you may feel a little bit skeptical about it. I haven't tried it on. I haven't actually seen it in person. We'll have to see if I can find this watch maybe at a boutique to try on, because then I'll have a better sense of if I like it or not. But I think it has a lot of the elements that I would like, which is interesting dial layout, time only, which is something that I love. I think it's an exceptional watch. So if you want to see pictures of it, be sure to go to the show notes. And with that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Life from the Wrist podcast. Covered a couple cool things in the news, I think. Pretty excited to see what happens in this next week. I wonder if that Rolex Bucherer sort of story is going to be confirmed by either of the brands. I'm excited to see what MB&F releases on Monday. We'll obviously cover it on the podcast next week. And as always, if there's anything exciting that happens, you can bet that we'll be talking about it here. If you are new to the Life from the Wrist podcast, be sure to follow us and share this podcast with a friend who might be interested in watch podcasts. We'd love to have you part of the Life from the Wrist family. And if you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. You know, it's the way that I can get feedback from you, unless you send me a direct message on any of our social medias or on our website. I really like getting the feedback from you and being able to, produce a podcast that you're going to be interested in. I'm doing this because I think you are enjoying the topics that we're discussing, but if there's something that you want to hear on these podcasts, be sure to send us a note or rate this podcast so that we know what you're looking for. As always, you can head over to lifeonthewrist.com for more content from us, as well as our social medias and YouTube channel. If you want to see more about the watches that we cover on a weekly basis, those will be linked in the show notes as well. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I hope you have a great week ahead of you, and until next time.